Hi there, it's Matt here, and welcome back to the podcast. A quick word before we begin. This podcast is entirely separate from my role as a university professor. Everything I share with you here is my own scientific opinion, my own reading of the evidence, and it does not represent the position of my university or of any organization I'm affiliated with. What you'll hear is education, not medical advice. And one note for tonight in particular, we are going to discuss the science of sex, frankly and clinically, as adults. If that's not right for you or for the ears nearby right now, this is your moment to step away. With that said, today is another one of our general brain science episodes. We go beyond sleep into the remarkable mysteries of the human brain and emotional and mental mind. And in this episode, we are going to do something quite wonderful. We are going to take the most celebrated, most mythologized, most poetry-soaked experience a human being can have and put it inside a brain scanner. Tonight, I want to talk about the science of love and desire and the deep biology of why we bond. Let me start with a claim that will sound at first almost insulting. Romantic love is not, strictly speaking, an emotion. Not in the way that happiness or fear or sadness are emotions. When researchers slid people who were madly freshly in love into a scanner and showed them a photograph of their beloved, the regions that lit up were not primarily the emotion centers. They were the brain's reward and motivation system, the dopamine-rich engine deep in the core of the brain, the ventral tegmental area, and a structure called the caudate. The very same circuitry that drives hunger, that drives thirst, that, in its darker corners, drives addiction. Sit with how strange that is. Love, the thing we put on greeting cards, shares its neural address with craving, which is why early romantic love does not feel like a gentle contentment. It feels like a need, a goal-directed, slightly desperate, can't eat, can't sleep, can't think about anything else drive to win one specific person. The poets always told us love was a kind of madness, a hunger, a thirst. The scanner, it turns out, agrees with the poets. So here's our map for the next half hour. I'm going to make the case that what we lump together under one tiny word, love, is actually three different brain systems that evolved for three different jobs and that do not always cooperate. I'll show you the dopamine engine of attraction, the ancient chemistry of long-term attachment, written first in a small Midwestern rodent, and the quieter system of pure desire. And I'll be honest with you about where the hype, especially around one famous hormone, has run miles ahead of the actual data. Let's begin by pulling those three systems apart, because once you see them separately, your entire romantic life reorganizes itself in front of you. The first system is the sex drive, lust, plainly. It is broad and relatively undiscriminating, pushing us toward, a range of possible partners. It runs substantially on the sex hormones, testosterone, and estrogen in all of us. Its evolutionary job is simple and ancient. Get genes out of the building. On its own, lust is not particular. It is not loyal. It does not write sonnets. It just wants. The second system is attraction, what we actually mean by romantic love, that obsessive, focused, intoxicating pull toward one person above all others. This is the dopamine system we just met, and its job is the opposite of lust. Not to broaden, but to narrow, to take all that diffuse mating energy and point it like a laser at a single individual long enough to actually pair up. This is the system that makes you check your phone 40 times an hour. And the third system is attachment. This is the calm, deep, enduring bond, the sense of security and union that, if you're lucky, settles in after the fireworks fade. Its job is to keep two people together long enough to raise a notoriously helpless human child through years of dependence. And it runs on a different chemistry entirely, two small molecules called oxytocin and vasopressin. Hold on to those two names because they are the heart of tonight's story. Now, here's the crucial, slightly dangerous insight. These three systems are separate. They can run independently. You can feel deep attachment to a long-term partner while feeling a flare of lust for a stranger and a pang of romantic obsession for someone else entirely, all in the same confusing afternoon. We are not built as single, unified, loving machines. We are built as three semi-independent drives, sometimes in harmony, often in competition, all wearing the same four-letter word. Half the heartbreak in human history is really just these three systems pulling in different directions. Let me take you deeper into that second system, attraction, because the brain imaging here is genuinely astonishing. When you look at the scans of someone in the grip of early romantic love, you see two things happening at once. Certain regions roar to life, the reward and motivation circuits we've discussed, but just as importantly, other regions go quiet. Specifically, areas involved in social judgment, in critical assessment of other people, and in negative emotion turn their volume down. Love is blind is not a metaphor. It is a neurological description. When you fall for someone, your brain is quite literally dialing down the machinery you would normally use to judge them, to spot the red flags, to assess them coolly. Evolution, in its ruthless wisdom, seems to have decided that if you saw your potential partner with complete, clear-eyed objectivity, you might never commit to anyone at all. So it briefly, mercifully switches off the critic. Your friends can see the problems, you cannot, and now you know why. There's a beautiful follow-up to this. When researchers compared the brains of people in romantic love with the brains of mothers gazing at their own children, the maps overlapped. Both forms of love lit up the same reward circuits, regions dense with receptors for oxytocin and vasopressin, and both, remarkably, suppressed that same network of critical social judgment. Whether it is a lover or a child, the brain seems to use one ancient toolkit for the people it has decided are irreplaceable.
I had a realization about a year ago. I, perhaps unsurprisingly, go on and on about what happens during sleep for recovery, things like growth hormone release and muscle repair, but I don't think I talk enough about what's happening in your body in the hours before sleep that sets up recovery or sabotages it during the night. And poor circulation, and here we're talking sort of swollen legs and inflammation in the lower extremities, all of that makes it harder for your body to do its job overnight. And especially if you're like me, I can be standing a lot of the time. I can be lecturing. I'm in and around the lab. I can be standing at my office desk. And furthermore, I do travel a fair amount, and those long haul flights can result in blood pooling in the legs. And as a result, you kind of almost feel as though you get leg claustrophobia, if that's almost a word. I don't think it is, but I think you probably know what I mean. That's why I ended up switching to something called hollow socks. And here's their secret sauce. Their compression socks are made from baby alpaca fiber, which is really soft, breathable. But the critical part is it has a graduated compression that actually promotes blood flow without strangling your legs to that point of suffocation. And I wore them recently on a 10-hour flight and genuinely forgot I'd had them on, whereas with the compression socks normally, I always have that sense that they're there. And over 2 million pairs sold and known medically that they are trusted by doctors. They are made in the United States, and for a limited time, Hollow Socks is having a buy two, get two free sale. So head over to hollowsocks.com. That's hollowsocks.com for 50% off. And if you can, just tell them that I sent you here, and that will help the show a little bit. But overall, just go and buy the socks. They're fantastic. hollowsocks.com.
Let me add one more brushstroke to the portrait of early attraction because it explains a behavior you have almost certainly been embarrassed by. Why, in the first delirious weeks of falling for someone, can you not stop thinking about them? The thought of them intrudes over and over, uninvited, while you're trying to work, trying to sleep, trying to hold an ordinary conversation. That is not a weakness of character. There is evidence that early romantic love is accompanied by a drop in a brain chemical called serotonin, down into a range we also see in obsessive compulsive disorder. I'll say that again. The neurochemistry of new love may overlap with the neurochemistry of obsession, which is exactly why the experience feels less like serene contentment and more like a delicious, maddening preoccupation you cannot switch off. In a real biochemical sense, you are a little bit unwell. And nature appears to have designed it that way because an obsessive, narrowed focus on one single person is precisely what's needed to overcome our natural wariness and actually bond. But attraction, that glorious dopamine fever, is by design temporary. No brain can sustain that level of obsessive craving for years, and frankly, none should. So how does nature convert the wildfire of early love into the slow, warm embers of a bond that can last decades? For that answer, we have to leave the human brain entirely and travel to the grasslands of the American Midwest. We have to talk about a small, brown, unremarkable rodent called the prairie vole. The prairie vole did something for the science of love that no human study could. Because here is the magic of this little creature. It is one of the rare mammals that forms a genuine, lifelong pair bond. A male and female meet, mate, and then stay together, sharing a nest, raising pups side by side, often until one of them dies. And crucially, the prairie vole has a close cousin, the meadow vole, that does the opposite. The meadow vole is a loner, promiscuous, forms no bonds at all. Two nearly identical animals, one devoted, one detached. Why? The answer cracked open the entire neuroscience of attachment. When prairie voles bond, their brains release oxytocin, especially important in the female, and vasopressin, especially important in the male. And these molecules act on the reward system, the same dopamine-rich regions, the nucleus accumbens and the ventral pallidum. In effect, the animal learns to associate the reward of mating with the specific scent and identity of one partner. The bond gets wired directly into the pleasure circuitry. The partner becomes neurologically rewarding in their own right. And the difference between the faithful vole and the faithless one, it comes down, in significant part, to where in the brain these molecules can act, the distribution of their receptors. The devoted prairie vole has receptors concentrated in exactly the reward regions where bonding can be learned. The loner meadow vole does not. Change the pattern of those receptors and you can change the animal's entire romantic destiny. Let me say that again because it is breathtaking and a little unsettling. In a vole, you can shift the geography of a single receptor and turn a wanderer into a partner. And that male molecule, vasopressin, does something else worth pausing on because it has a darker, more protective edge. In the bonded male vole, vasopressin doesn't only build attachment, it drives mate guarding, a fierce new territoriality, an aggression toward intruding males that simply wasn't there before he paired up. Bonding and guarding, written by the same pen. And that should make us think about one of the least romantic but most universal companions of human love, jealousy. Jealousy is usually treated as a purely emotional failing, a sign of insecurity. But viewed through this lens, it looks more like an ancient piece of pair bonding machinery, the same evolutionary logic that turns a placid vole into a guard, switched on in a creature that can now agonize over it for weeks. It doesn't excuse anything jealousy makes us do, but it does explain why the feeling arrives with such primitive bodily force. It is bonding's shadow, the same system that says, "Stay with me," also whispers, "and let no one take you." I have to be careful here, and you would be right to push back. We are not voles. Human love is layered with culture, memory, choice, language, history, things no rodent will ever know. But the deep chemistry, the oxytocin and vasopressin systems sitting at the root of mammalian bonding, that machinery is highly conserved. It runs in modified form in us too. The vole gave us the blueprint. We are a far more elaborate building, built on a recognizably similar foundation. So what about that chemistry in actual humans? Here, the data are softer, harder to gather, but suggestive. In one study, couples in the first flush of a new relationship had markedly higher levels of oxytocin in their blood than single people. And the height of that oxytocin in those early months actually predicted whether the couple was still together 6 months later. The chemistry of those first weeks seemed to carry information about the bond's future. The molecule, in some quiet way, was keeping score. And this is the moment I have to stop you before you do what almost everyone does, and before the wellness industry does it for you, because you have probably heard oxytocin called the love hormone, the cuddle chemical, the moral molecule. You can buy it as a nasal spray marketed to make you more trusting, more loving, more bonded. So let me, as your skeptical friend, apply the brakes hard. The science does not support that fairy tale. Oxytocin is not a simple dial that turned up pours love into a person. When researchers actually scrutinized the human studies, they found a story far messier and more interesting. Oxytocin doesn't manufacture warmth out of nothing. It appears to act more like a volume knob on social information, amplifying whatever social signals are already relevant to you. And here is the part the nasal spray sellers leave off the label. By sharpening your focus on your group, your partner, your child, your tribe, oxytocin can, in some contexts, increase suspicion or hostility toward outsiders. The same molecule that may deepen the bond with your beloved can, in the wrong setting, sharpen the line between us and them. It is not a love potion. It is a social salience amplifier, considerably less romantic, considerably more accurate. This is, by the way, exactly the kind of correction that real science exists to perform. A clean, simple, sellable story. Oxytocin equals love, collides with careful data, and shatters into something truer and more nuanced. If you take one habit of mind from tonight, let it be this. Whenever someone hands you a single molecule and a single feeling and ties them together with a neat little bow, reach for your skepticism. The brain is never that tidy. So let me return to the question that I think most of you actually came here for, not what is the chemistry of falling in love, but the harder one. Does it last? Is the fading of that early fever inevitable? Is long-term love just a polite, companionable arrangement after the dopamine runs dry? And here, the science delivered a genuine surprise, one I find deeply hopeful. Researchers went looking for people who had been married for, on average, 2 decades, and who still reported being intensely in love with their partners. Not just comfortable, but in love. Most scientists half expected to find nobody, or to catch them exaggerating. They found them. And when they put these long-married, still besotted people in the scanner, their brains still showed activation in that same dopamine-rich reward region, the ventral tegmental area that lights up in new lovers. The wildfire of romantic attraction does not have to burn out into mere routine. In some couples, after 20 years, the dopamine engine of romantic love is still running. But, and this is the lovely part, in these long-term lovers, it ran alongside the calm attachment circuitry, the oxytocin and vasopressin regions of security and bonding. They had somehow kept the fire and built the hearth. Passion married to peace. The craving of early love paired with the safety of deep attachment. That, to me, is the most important finding in this whole field, because it means lasting passionate love is not a myth, and it is not a lie people tell on anniversaries. It is a real, observable brain state. The question is no longer, is it possible? The question becomes, what are those couples doing that keeps both systems alive? And that is a question you get to answer with your own life. There's a quieter dimension to attachment I don't want to skip, because it may be the most practical thing I tell you tonight. A secure bond is not only a feeling, it is a physiological instrument, a tool your body uses to regulate stress. In careful experiments, when a person faces the threat of a mild electric shock while holding the hand of a loved one, their brain's threat response measurably drops compared with facing the same threat alone or holding a stranger's hand. Let that land. The mere physical presence of someone you're bonded to reaches into your nervous system and turns the alarm down. We are not, it turns out, self-soothing creatures. We are co-regulating ones. From the cradle onward, we use other people as external thermostats for our own inner state. This is why loneliness is not merely unpleasant, but genuinely corrosive to health, and why losing a partner can leave the survivor's whole physiology dysregulated, as though part of their own stress management system had been amputated. And the shape of how we bond is laid down early. The patterns of attachment we form with our first caregivers, whether the world felt reliably responsive or anxious or cold, seem to echo into the way we love as adults. Some of us reach for closeness easily and trust it. Some crave it, but fear it will be snatched away and so cling. Some learned long ago to armor up and not to need anyone at all. These are not life sentences. The brain stays capable of relearning, and a steady, secure partner can slowly rewrite an anxious template. But it does mean that when two people collide in love, neither is starting from a blank page. Each carries a whole invisible history of how love is supposed to feel, written before they could even speak. Half of intimacy is, quietly, two old templates learning to read each other. And if those templates can be rewritten, can closeness itself be deliberately built? There's a famous little experiment that suggests it can. Take two strangers, sit them down, and have them ask each other a series of escalating personal questions, each one a small mutual act of letting yourself be seen while the other does the same. Pairs who did this reported feeling dramatically closer than pairs who simply made small talk, and in at least one celebrated case, two participants later married. The mechanism isn't magic. Intimacy, it seems, is built largely from accumulated moments of mutual vulnerability, of being known and not rejected, which means closeness isn't only something that strikes you like lightning. It is also something two people can choose to construct question by question, confession by confession.
A long-standing partner of today's podcast is Element, spelled LMNT. Element is a sugar-free electrolyte drink mix, and for me, it was the sugar-free part that made me start using it a while back. And again, I buy my own supply just to stay objective. Beyond having the electrolytes in the right balance, the other reason I'm a fan of Element is that it's scientific. If you look up the people who created the company, you'll find some pretty heavy-hitting physiology, biochemistry, and pharmacology knowledge baked into the product. And again, all of that comes without any sugar. Now, here's the update. Element's lemonade salt flavor, which used to be seasonal, was so popular that it's now permanent. You can get it year-round. Happily, I badgered them, and they have agreed to give you fine folks a free 8-count sample pack with any purchase of Element if you use the link drinklmnt.com/Matt Walker. So for free product with your purchase, just visit drinklmnt.com/Matt Walker. And as I said, you'll get some free product.
Now, we cannot honestly talk about desire and bonding without talking about the moment they so often build toward. So let me, as a scientist, take you into the brain and body at the very peak of sexual response, the orgasm, because the science here is genuinely surprising, and it differs in real, measurable ways between men and women. Start with the body. Physically, orgasm is a brief, intense whole-body event. A surge of the sympathetic nervous system, a spike in heart rate and blood pressure, and a series of rhythmic muscular contractions of the pelvic floor firing at roughly 0.8 of a second intervals. That much has been understood for decades, but the truly counterintuitive discoveries arrived only when researchers managed to capture the human brain during orgasm inside a scanner. And what they found was, in large part, not a brain switching on, but a brain switching off. At the moment of orgasm, in both men and women, large stretches of the prefrontal cortex, the seat of judgment, vigilance, and self-control, go quiet. In women especially, regions involved in fear, anxiety, and emotional regulation show a marked drop in activity. One of the lead researchers described the orgasmic brain as resembling a state of profound release of control. And that gives a neurological backbone to something people know in their bones. You cannot force an orgasm by trying harder. The tighter you grip for it, the further it retreats. It requires, almost paradoxically, a letting go, a switching off of the very vigilant circuits we spend most of our waking lives keeping switched on. The old French nickname for orgasm, the little death, turns out to be a surprisingly decent piece of neuroscience. Meanwhile, down in the reward system, our old friends, the dopamine circuits, light up the same craving and pleasure machinery we met in romantic love and, less romantically, in addiction. And in the aftermath comes a chemical tide, a surge of oxytocin, the very same bonding molecule that has run through this whole episode, which is one reason sex and attachment are so deeply braided together. Alongside it rises a hormone called prolactin, linked to a feeling of enough. And here is where one of the clearest sex differences appears. After orgasm, most men enter what's called a refractory period, a recovery window in which another orgasm is difficult or impossible, and that post-orgasm prolactin surge is thought to be one of the factors that enforces it. Women, on average, have a far shorter refractory period, or none at all, which is part of why women are much more likely to be capable of multiple orgasms in close succession. The female sexual response runs, in this sense, on a different architecture, often slower to arrive, more variable in its pattern, and able to repeat in a way the male system typically cannot. And here is perhaps the most astonishing finding of all, one that proves orgasm is fundamentally a brain event and not merely a genital one. Researchers studied women with complete spinal cord injuries, women in whom the ordinary nerve pathways running from the genitals up through the spinal cord had been entirely severed. By every conventional assumption, orgasm should have been impossible, and yet many of them could still experience it. How? Because there appears to be a separate ancient back channel, the vagus nerve, carrying signals from the body directly up to the brain, bypassing the damaged spinal cord altogether. The pleasure simply found another road. The body, it turns out, has more than one way to reach the brain. Before we gather the threads, I owe you two harder truths. Because a tour of love that only visited the beautiful rooms would be a kind of lie. The first is about desire and why it so often pulls in a different direction from attachment. Remember, these are separate systems, and the system of pure desire runs in part on novelty. There's a well-documented effect across many species, sometimes called the Coolidge effect, where sexual interest in a familiar partner wanes, then comes roaring back the instant a new partner appears. The same mammalian wiring that helped spread genes also sits quietly beneath one of the central tensions of long-term human love, that the very familiarity which deepens attachment can, over time, dampen desire. Security and novelty are both real human needs, and they do not always want the same things. This is not a moral failing in your relationship. It is two ancient systems, attachment craving the known, desire craving the new, sharing one bed. Understanding that they are different systems is, I think, the beginning of being wise about both. And the second hard truth is heartbreak, because if romantic love lives in the brain's reward and craving circuitry, then losing love is not merely sad, it is withdrawal. When a bond is torn away, that same dopamine-driven system, the one that was organized around wanting one specific person, doesn't switch off politely. It goes into overdrive, craving the very person it can no longer have, which is exactly why rejection can feel less like grief and more like the desperate physical agony of an addict cut off from a drug. The obsessive thoughts, the inability to eat or sleep, the bargaining, the relapse of a single text message at 2 a.m., these are not weakness. They are a reward system in acute withdrawal. It is, in the most literal neurological sense, one of the hardest things a human brain is ever asked to do. To unwant someone it was built to want. Let me gather the threads because I think the shape of the whole thing is now visible. We arrived tonight thinking love was one thing, a single magical feeling. We are leaving with 3 systems: lust, riding the sex hormones, broad and ancient and undiscriminating; attraction, the dopamine fever, narrowing all that energy onto one irreplaceable person while it quietly switches off our judgment; and attachment, the oxytocin and vasopressin bond, written first in a small, faithful vole that turns a lover into a home. 3 systems evolved for 3 jobs that can cooperate or compete or break our hearts by pointing in different directions. And underneath all of it, a reason for some humility. These are small studies, often looking at the unimaginably complex inside a noisy scanner. Correlation, not always cause. Brains volunteered mostly by university students in wealthy countries. The biology I've described tonight is real, and it is a foundation, but it is not the whole house. It cannot by itself tell you whom to love or how or for how long. Because here is where the biology hands the pen back to you. Yes, you are running on ancient chemistry. Yes, a molecule was, in some sense, keeping score in your first months together. But you are also the one animal that gets to know all of this and decide what to do with it. You can understand that the early fever will cool and choose not to mistake the cooling for the end. You can understand that attachment is built, behavior by behavior, scent by scent, ordinary day by ordinary day, and choose to keep building it. The voles cannot choose. The dopamine cannot choose. But you can. So the next time you feel that absurd, undignified, can't eat, can't sleep, pull toward another person, I hope you'll feel 2 things at once. The ancient drive roaring up from the oldest part of your brain, exactly as it did in our ancestors 100,000 years ago. And the quiet, modern wonder of being a creature that can watch its own machinery work, smile at it, and still choose with open eyes to love. I hope you found this episode enlightening and intriguing. And more generally, thanks so much for supporting the podcast. No need to leave any reviews or ratings. The only thing I would ask is your kindness and sharing this podcast with others. That's the best way to grow our audience. Thanks so much again. Until the next time, take care, sleep well. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.